Hello, everyone, and welcome to Talk Nerdy. Today is Monday, November 7th, 2022, and I'm the host of the show, Cara Santa Maria, and I'm so excited about this week's episode because I get to talk to an old friend, and we get to have so much fun, and she's amazing, and yeah. But before we dive into that, I do want to thank those of you who make Talk Nerdy possible. Remember, Talk Nerdy is and will always be 100% free to download. And that's because I rely on the support of listeners just like you. If you would like to pledge your support on an episodic basis and get access to all sorts of perks like ad-free episodes, all you've got to do is visit patreon.com/talknerdy. This week's top patrons include Daniel Lang, David J.E. Smith, Mary Neva, Brian Holden, David Compton, Gabrielle F. Jaramillo Gonzalez, Joe Wilkinson, Leonard Prince, Pasquale Gelati, Patrick Flynn, Ulrika Hagman, and yeah, that's it. Thank you guys so much. All right, let's get into the show. So this week, I had the opportunity to talk to somebody who hasn't been on the show in many years. And actually, when she was first on the show, we became good friends, and we've stayed good friends ever since. Her name is Rachel Ignotofsky. She's a New York Times bestselling author and illustrator. And she has written so many incredible, beautiful, informative, fascinating books, starting with women in science and then women in sports, women in art, the wondrous workings of planet Earth, what's inside a flower. She has a lot of kids' books that she's done as well, a lot of cool kind of like cards and puzzles and notebooks and things like that. But her newest book is, I mean, it really is an accomplishment. It's called The History of the Computer: People, Inventions, and Technology That Changed Our World. It's fascinating. It's informative. It took a lot of work, and perhaps even more important, or equally important, it's absolutely beautiful. So we're going to get into it. Here she is without any further ado. It's Rachel Ignotofsky. Well, Rachel, oh my gosh, it's been too long.
Cara, my very favorite SciComm person in the whole wide world.
I have missed you dearly. I haven't seen you in ages. It's been so long.
I know. We have to like do all the time math when trying to talk to each other. The the day exchange, I call it.
Absolutely. I won't be here much longer. Well, that's not true. Another 10 months or so. But then I'm going to come back to the left coast and we can spend more time together. I have your new book in front of me, Rachel, if I were at home, I would have all your books in front of me, and I'm trying to count them in my head. And I know I have at least 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Is this the 6th main book?
It is the
so many now.
Now I have to like count because it's a lot for me too. 3 women in books, so women in science, women in art, and women in sports, and then the wondrous workings of planet Earth, a kid's picture book all about science called What's Inside a Flower. And then, this is my 6th main book because I do all this other stuff too. I'm always like, merchandise. I can't help myself. I'm like, if I'm going to make a book, then it's going to turn into a coloring book because I just think like science is fun to interact with any way you can. I'm like a big component of play. So I turn all my books into puzzles. But this is the newest book, The History of the Computer. And it took me 3 years to write and illustrate.
Jeez. Wow. I love it so much. And I have to say, your medium, I mean, obviously it's a visual medium. You're an artist and your books are beautiful. So it makes sense that there are puzzles and notebooks and coloring books and all sorts of cool things that you can buy and you can play with on top of the main books. And I was just, oh my gosh, I think I did. I sent you a text. I was just at the Frost Museum, which is down in Miami, last weekend. And I saw your book proudly on display. And tell me more about, I'm jumping around, but you have like a full display at the Field Museum right now, don't you?
Yeah, I do. So I just went on this like huge road trip to kind of visit all the places and people I haven't seen since 2019 because, I don't know what crazy world event happened that made me stay in my home for so long. What could it have been? But anyway, we went on the road and I started this collaboration with the Field Museum in 2019, and and then COVID shut everything down, especially our beloved museums. And now I got to finally see it, and it's this huge sort of merchandise and like display that's all over the museum, all about women in science. So they took a ton of the doodles that were in the book and they turned them into keychains and scarves and magnets, and all of this goes into supporting the museum, which is fantastic. So if you go to the Field Museum, you can like see these like crazy cool t-shirts and water bottles that they made. And again, it's like it's like a awesome collaboration with them. And it's also just another way to support the institutions that I use when doing my research, which a lot of times it's me going to museums, talking with their staff, getting to dig around their little secret behind the scenes areas. So yeah, it was just so wonderful getting to visit the Field Museum, which I've been going to for a really long time.
I love that so, so, so much. And so that was a celebration of your women in science, which is one of those three that you mentioned before. But again, your new book, The History of the Computer, it's different, but it's not. It's different topically completely, although you have celebrated computer scientists throughout history in, your other books. But it's so like, this is intense, the amount of research that you had to do and the amount of just knowledge you had to gain to be able to talk about a topic that, I don't know, like, I don't think most of us just like naturally have a lot of know-how about computers, computer science, computer history.
This was a mountain to climb. So like, this is like also the first fully illustrated history of technology that goes all the way back to prehistoric humans to literally yesterday. And because it's the first one, I also had to figure out kind of like from the ground up what structurally what a book like this would even look like. And because I'm a graphic designer and illustrator, I kind of have each chapter broken down by a time period where a huge shift in technology happens. And then I have like an illustrated timeline. I have a section that's stories throughout history. I highlight different inventions from each time period. And I also highlight different people. And although I highlight different people, it's like throughout my research, it became very clear that, yeah, there's some more flamboyant personalities and there's some like inventors that like have become really famous. But like the history of computers is thousands and thousands of people standing upon each other's shoulders, helping each other throughout time and history, working collaboratively together towards this humongous goal of creating tools that augment human intellect. And so, like I said before, it was a 3-year project. And yeah, I read a ton of really thick books, thickum books. You gotta read books to make books. And again, like I also, before the shutdown from COVID, I got to visit all these really cool museums. Some of those museums don't exist anymore, like the living, what is it called? It's the Living Computer Science and Labs in Seattle, which was Paul Allen's museum. Like that got shut down because of COVID. And that was one of the coolest places I've ever been in my life. It was like, like when you go to the Met and they have like a Victorian living room that you can go and look at. They had one, it was like an 80s basement that you could like sit in and play Nintendo. I was like, this is so cool. And like a classroom from the 1970s where you could sit down.
That.
And yeah, it was like, it's like, had a great sense of humor and the staff was amazing. And because of that shutdown, and for me, I wanted to have a tactile experience during my research to be able to really draw these machines and people's relationship with them and describe them. So me and my husband actually created our own mini computer collection, mini vintage computer museum. And now we own like all 3 of the computers from the 1977 Trinity. That's what they like to call it. The Commodore PET, the Apple II, the TRS-80 from Radio Shack, and we own like a 1984 Macintosh. We own a ton of computers now, and we take them on the road with us, and we do a little mini museum whenever we give presentations for the book. So, it was very different researching this book for sure.
Oh, it's so fun. And I guess I wasn't sure if you developed that interest, that collector spirit, that taste for these computers as you were working on the book, or if you just always were sort of a vintage computer nerd and that was the impetus for diving into this topic. Like, which was the chicken and which was the egg?
Oh man, it's kind of a combination. It's also like, this is going to be goofy to say, it's a little bit of a love story. Like, when I met my husband like the year out of college. He was still in college, and our dates often would get like interrupted by trash on the side of the road that he'd be like, oh man, I'm going to flip this on eBay to help me pay for college. So like we'd be on a date, and then all of a sudden there would be like a VHS TV combo in the back of the car that he was going to fix up. And then, fast forward to like a year later, we're living together, and now my apartment has all of this old tech that's getting like refurbished in our house. And there was this one piece of equipment. It was this calculator that had Nixie tubes, and I believe it was from around the 1960s, and it was just so beautiful. Like, instead of having a display screen, the tubes themselves would light up the numbers. And I just thought it was so cool. And then looking at that next to like my iPhone, I was like, this looks so alien compared to the technology that I'm using every day. And then that's kind of like, it flipped the light switch on for me, where I was like, this stuff, these are like these beautiful antiques that are almost like works of art and feats of engineering. And I just really wanted to learn more about them. And I was like, when I want to learn more about something, I kind of end up being like, I should write a book about this one day. And so it got on the list where I'm like, I'm going to figure out a way to get paid to spend 3 years just learning about this one thing. So that's kind of what sparked it all.
I love that. Was it an easy sell, like to the publishers, to the public? Did you feel like it was a big turn from the work that you'd done in the past, which tended to be more about people and more about, I guess we could maybe say loosely, like the life sciences as opposed to the physical sciences?
Yeah, I do focus a lot on books about identity and history and inclusion. And I do focus a lot on like life science. I like to say backyard biology, the kind of questions you get when you just walk around nature. But for this, I thought it was really important to do because there's no such thing as like a computer nerd anymore, in my opinion. Like this sort of like loner who's like, I know all about computers and I'm the only one on the block who has a computer. That kind of nerd that existed kind of like in the 90s, Now we all use computers. Like nearly everyone walks around with a device in their pocket that's a million times more powerful than the computer that got us to the moon initially, the Apollo guidance computer. But I don't think a lot of people understand what that tool is capable of, or really understand the history that got us to this place. And then how are we supposed to ask critically for anything of our devices? So I just thought it was, even though this doesn't really focus on people the way that my other books do, it is very much a people book. It's about humanity's relationship with tools and how those tools change us and change society. And by learning about history, that's the only way we can kind of untangle some of the messes that we're in right now with technology, if you know what I mean. So yeah, it was an easy sell. It was an easy sell.
Good. I'm glad to hear that. I mean, I was so excited when I heard that you were working on this because it is something that again, like I'm curious about, I think we all are because we all have computers. I'm talking to you through a computer. I have a computer in my back pocket. Everything in my house now has computer chips in it, but it's it's still for so many people a black box. It's still for so many people like this thing that feels almost too complicated to comprehend. But of course, if we can go back to the beginning and understand the theories behind it, understand the problems that early computers were attempting to solve, and see how they've evolved over time, even if we couldn't code overnight, or even if we couldn't maybe build a computer from scratch in our on our kitchen table overnight, we I think there's a depth of understanding of sort of computational thought that comes from going back in time, and you did such a beautiful job of bringing us along that journey.
Oh, thank you so much, Cara. And it's kind of funny because you talk to people whose job is coding or their job is, maybe designing the circuit boards and things like that. And they don't know a lot about the history either. They know a lot about their specialized skill. And, it's kind of funny because even right now, we're talking to each other kind of through like just an audio Zoom program. But I mean, we all have been taking these Zoom meetings um, throughout the pandemic all day. And what was really interesting for me was learning about the lineage of even just that, which goes all the way back to the 1960s to Douglas Engelbart and the development of the online system, the NLS, which was basically a huge computer where for the first time ever, people could video chat and work collaboratively on a document together. And he demonstrated this in what is called the mother of all demos, which is like long before Steve Jobs ever, put on the turtleneck and pointed to an iPhone on stage. This was like the presentation of technology that really, I mean, it opened everyone's third eyeball up. But what a lot of people don't know is that that program was completely government funded by NASA and ARPA. And it was funded as a blue sky project for scientists to basically be like, we want to make American citizens collectively smarter. How can we do that? Here's a bunch of money. I mean, that sounds like something almost like futuristic. Do you know what I mean? Like something that like a future like utopian government would be like, we just want to make everyone smarter because smarter people is makes a better society. Here's some money, scientists, do whatever you want. But really, it's something that we did in the past. And for Douglas Engelbart, he thought a lot about this scientist that he read about named Vannevar Bush, who was the chief scientist under Roosevelt. He was the director of the Manhattan Project. And he had this concept for just this like theoretical desk called the MEMEX. And so we're talking about like even decades before the online system and the mother of all demos was ever done. There were, Vannevar Bush wrote this paper describing this almost like futuristic desk that had a lot of the capabilities of a first generation desktop computer. And for Douglas Engelbart, he read that and he was like, if only we had tools that could augment our human intellect. And when I say augment our human intellect, I mean, these are tools that help us store information, that expand our ability to do, you know, all sorts of problems, math problems, writing problems, tools that make us smarter. If we only had access to those tools, then collectively all of humanity could leap forward. So these are just like really radical ideas that are all behind the technology that we're using every day and we really take for granted. And when you think about those philosophies, you begin to critically think, what are the tools that I'm using right now? Is the way that my smartphone designed, is the way that I'm allowed to interact with it? What is that doing to me? How is that augmenting my human intellect? What parts of myself am I amplifying with these tools and the software I'm using? So just like from a media theory, um, learning history allows you to kind of really critically think about how you're interacting with software and computers now, even if you don't know how to code.
Oh, you're so right. I mean, and obviously we can think of a million examples of like the processing power of our own brains being freed up for other tasks. Or, there may be a alternate ways to interpret that. But, I think about like, how did people live without GPS? And how did people live constantly? What did we do before we could text? It just feels like, what was the world like? But of course, we existed and we survived. And I think about my own field, psychology, and how without studying the history and systems of psychology, I don't think that I would have nearly as sophisticated an understanding of what we know. Knowing how we know what we know helps us know it in a really intimate and complex way.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like obvious that, hey, by learning history, we can better navigate the present. But for technology, a lot of people are so focused on like, what's the next like iPhone release, and like, oh, like what is this like company doing, this like specific company doing right now, that we forget that we're actually part of this living history that goes back to the Stone Age. It goes back to the first like number tools created by early man. And that's where the lineage starts,
Yeah, it's just so fundamentally important, and there's so much depth and richness. Like, I'm thinking about how you even organized your thoughts, and you laid out your book temporally, which makes sense. There's a chronology to it because of course we're talking about history. But then within each sort of, I don't know, would you call them semi-arbitrary? Would you say that they were really clean and clear, like distinct points in time where you would say, okay, this first chunk is ancient, the next chunk is steam and machines, then you go on to World War II, post-war. Like, was it easy for you to pick how to chunk out history, or was that like, I'm just gonna throw a dart at a dartboard here?
Well, so that part was okay. So like, I'm a graphic designer, so organizing 25,000 years of human history was like the funnest part for me, where I'm like, ooh, yay. Like I'm like looking through, for me, of course, like I start with like the very fun stuff where I'm looking through all the graphic design from all like the advertising that's happened in the past. So I'm looking at like, beautiful type lockups from, the Industrial Revolution. And I'm looking at like all the manuals that came with like, the first UNIVAC computer, which are like space age gold. So I kind of really started in that world of being like, what is going to be the visual language of this book? Because I do really use like icons and illustrations to really give you a sense of place in each chapter. But for me, a huge shift in technology is all about what people are doing with it. So like, it's kind of funny. Like the first chapter in this book literally goes like from 25,000 BCE to 1599 CE. So we're talking about like prehistoric to medieval. Yeah, it's a ton of time. Yeah. And then as you go through the book, you're like, okay, like, a couple decades. Oh, and then it starts becoming like 10-year chunks. And there was kind of the headers of the book really kind of like talk about kind of the overarching themes in each chapter. So for the 1980s, so of course, like the 1970s is all about the personal computer revolution, but for the 1980s, it's all about the shift that happened where computers become a creative tool. So like you start thinking about some of the capabilities computers had that they didn't have in the era before. And what we're specifically talking about is a desktop user interface, a graphical user interface that has icons in it that represent their real world components, which is called skeuomorphic design. And this is something that I've been into for a while as a graphic designer. And just to explain it even further, it's like, hey, you turn on your computer, the computer kind of does like a little show for you. It's not this black screen with blinking, with like, a blinking dot waiting for you to type in command code. That requires a ton of technical like knowledge to be able to even, begin using that thing. But the graphical user interface with a desktop metaphor. It puts on this cool show. It's like, hey, everyone, your file looks like a piece of paper. The clock looks like a clock. Click around. There's windows, and also it's like by creating icons and by designing icons, you're able to reach a whole new audience because you don't need it. You could literally just turn the computer on and approach it and begin using it. And I remember my first experience with computers being when I was actually 7 years old in my local library. I waddled on up to like a Mac Color Classic, and I just like turned it on and began using the Paint program all by myself. And when you think about like, that sounds like a super normal thing now. Of course, kids are using computers all the time. But, back in the early 90s, and that kind of dates myself, there was this like kind of like moment where my mom was like, this is nuts, because my mom remembered programming and assembly. My mom was a computer programmer in the 80s, and she remembers like the mainframe computers where, no one was allowed to touch them. They were locked away in refrigerated rooms, and she had her little stack of punch cards that she had to like submit whenever she wanted to program something and then wait for it to come back. So the fact that her daughter could just literally go into a dingy public library, walk up to a computer and start playing with it without talking to anyone, that's really radical. And the reason that can happen, a lot of that has to do with the graphic design that is on our desktops. And the Macintosh computer in 1984 wasn't the first one to use a desktop interface, but it was the first computer that people and small businesses could actually afford. And the designs on that are all done by one of my heroes, Susan Carr. She's the one who created all of those super iconic, like the little pencil, the little dog, the save icon. That's all Susan Carr. And it's her graphic design and her working with Apple, and also all of the work that was done at Xerox PARC in the 70s, which is really the first desktop user interface. And a lot of those people went on to work at Apple, and there was a huge exchange of ideas. All of that is why I have the career I have right now, which started at 7 years old, where I got to draw for the first time on a computer. And I was like, I love doing this. And I kept doing it for the rest of my life, And for me, I've always been interested in this, especially as a graphic designer, because one of my graphic design heroes was instrumental in creating all these super iconic icons. There's no other way to say it.
I know, it's like the actual origin of the word, which is amazing.
I know. And that designer's name is Susan Carr, who worked at Apple. And the little save icon that's super famous, the little dog, the little pencil, all of that was designed by her. Actually, she would draw on graphing paper, and she kind of used the same sort of philosophy as she did when she was creating needlepoint. She was like, oh, okay, I'm just going to draw on graphing paper to create these. And it's
cool. So that gave her a lot of balance and form, and she could make things a bit symmetrical. She could really work with the space on the paper because it was gridded out for her.
Exactly. And she could see what it would look like way before they programmed it into the computer. And it's really, it's really interesting. In the 80s, there's a lot of design that you can really tell that the sort of muscle memory of just using traditional medium is there getting translated. A lot of things are happening in the physical world and then getting translated in a very different way. Because again, it's not like they had high definition scanners or anything like that. It's a completely different world than what we're living in now, art wise. But it's that work that she did at Apple that really allowed computers to take off. And then, of course, companies followed in suit. And let me just pause right there, because I know I'll get heat for this if I don't say it. The desktop user interface, the desktop metaphor, it was developed at Xerox PARC in the 70s on the Xerox Alto. The Macintosh computer was not the first computer that featured this. It was just the first computer that people could actually afford, and small businesses began to buy it, and people began creating their own zines and doing art projects on the computer. And really, it's like, this is the reason I have the job I do now. It's because when I was 7 years old, I got to play around with this stuff and I fell in love with it. And I've been drawing on the computer ever since.
Ugh, I love that so, so, so much. And I mean, it's almost seems like a silly thing, but it's not a silly thing. The icons, the iconography that you're talking about are the language that the user gets to use. Of course, coding is the language of the computer, and that's all happening sort of quote behind the scenes. But the art is the language that we as the users use to interact with our machines. It's how we communicate with them is through imagery.
Ivan Sutherland, who developed one of the first vector systems, he described a graphic user interface as like a magical looking glass of a world of numbers. And I may be not quoting him perfectly, but that was the essence of what he was saying. It is a theater show for all of the math that's going on inside your computer to make it so that everyday people can use it as a tool to be creative with. And it also shows you the power that art has. And I've always said that art is and visuals are the most powerful tools when it comes to education. I mean, this really proves it. A 7-year-old was onboarded for a computer in seconds just because the visuals were correct.
Yeah. It's so cool. And I think about too, kind of like the then versus the now versus the who knows what in the future. And even just how we engage and interact is always evolving. Like I have an office job right now. I'm working at a university seeing clients for my psychology internship. And there's some like old school stuff in this office. Like we're still using paper charts. It's a lot. But one of the things is I have like a phone, like a physical phone on my desk that clients can call me on and I can pick it up and call them. And when I am away from my desk, people call and they leave a voicemail. And the button to check my voicemail is a picture of a letter. Like that's like I have mail, like physical mail on my phone. It's voicemail, right? And so like, and you think about like, there's the funny meme going around where somebody showed their kid a diskette, not a floppy disk, but like the smaller disks, right? That we used to use to record data on computers that we would store data on. And he showed it to his kid and his kid was like, how funny you 3D printed the save icon. Like he just didn't even know.
Nice.
And you think about the fact that these things that are so relevant because we do think in metaphor. Like, I don't know, Steve on another podcast I work on, The Skeptic's Guide, Steve always talks about how like the earliest cars literally just looked like horse carriages. Like they just, because that's the only thing we could see. Like we didn't know cars and the future of cars. We were just making the next thing in the series of the things that we understood. And that's how this iconography is evolving too. So I'd be so fascinated to see in 100 years how we're representing technology visually.
I think it's going to get more seamless. Do you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Like if I had to
like the metaphor may not even be that visual anymore, or it'll be visual, but it'll be like tactile and multisensory almost.
The everything is headed towards this idea of like ubiquitous computing, where it's like it's embedded in the walls, it's seamless, it's in it's the window in your car is like has a screen that you're looking at the whole time. And then the challenge is going to be, and maybe this is a little dark, the challenge is going to be like, how do we protect our privacy and how do we make it so that it's just not a ad pop-up nightmare in your living room?
Oh yeah, that's my least. Every dystopian like video or television show that gets me on a super deep level goes to that place where it's like we're walking around and it's just constant advertising 24/7 in our own heads, and that's my worst nightmare. It's so scary.
Yeah. I mean, it's how far away from that are we? I know,
Right.
like everybody like talks about that scene in Minority Report, right? And it's like if the screen on your car is also a video screen and there's no regulations, you're going to have to pay to turn all that off. And it's going to be literally paying to not see ads.
Yeah. What about if it's like in your head? You know what I mean? What about like a contact or like a Google Glass? I know we tried Google Glass. It didn't work, but maybe it was a bit too early, But what about when it's literally just, what's it called? Not VR, but AR, just in life, just everywhere.
Well, if you're staring down at your phone, and I always say the phone is designed to be a passive tool in a lot of ways. In the book I wrote, a lot of people have read a book on their phone, but not a lot of people have written a book on their phone. And so, again, when you think about functionality, you're thinking about how can I create things? And by creating things, you're able to build your own wealth, and then who has access to the tools to be able to do that. Anyway, that's a whole nother conversation. But if we're staring at our phone, and filtering everything through our phone, how far away are we from that anyway? If functionality, it's like whether it's in your contact lens or in your hand, if you're staring at it all day, what is it doing to you? And if all
Oh,
you're
for
doing is
sure.
getting ads, what is it doing for you?
Ugh, and how is that actually affecting our psychology, our personalities, our relationship with others, our relationship with the natural world? I mean, all of our relationships with ourselves. I mean, that's the thing. Like, I know that you kind of opened a little bit of a door to peek behind a corner and said, that's a whole other conversation because it really is. But that conversation that you just started to touch on is so fundamentally important, and it just reinforces how social justice, intersectionality, these fundamental kind of like human concerns are not separate from anything. They're not separate from technology. They're not separate from computers. They're part of the actual evolution of these things.
Absolutely. And there's a theme that you see repeat itself throughout history is that technology is only accessible by a powerful few, and then something happens where it gets liberated for the masses, but it's a cycle that repeats itself over and over and over again, and only by learning history can you see where we are in the cycle. And okay, so while I was researching this book, and these statistics are in the book, let's talk about smartphone dependency. Like I said before, the smartphone, it's not because of what it's capable of, it's designed to be a limited device. I mean, we could, if they wanted to, they could open it up to be as functional as a desktop computer, but companies have chosen not to do that. And then we talk about smartphone dependency, which is the smartphone being the only computer in some people's houses, the only way they can access the internet. And demographically, those are people who are lower income and also younger people. So if they don't have the tools to be able to build their own wealth and create things with this technology, and they only have the power to consume, how is that equitable?
Right. And how effective that really is at like maintaining a sort of permanent underclass. It's kind of intentional. At the very least, it's insidious, but it feels intentional.
It's a post-personal computer world. That's what it is. It's the taking the personal computer and kind of slicing it up at the butcher to create as many things that you can sell as possible. And maybe creating an underclass isn't the intent, but definitely creating the highest profit you can is. And the result of that is always in detriment to people who have been in secular poverty. That's always who it
Yeah.
hurts the most. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. So it's kind of like even if this isn't the intended outcome, it's always going to be an outcome. And I do think that the people who are making, important societal decisions should be aware of that. And I do think many of them probably are, and maybe some people are blissfully unaware. But again, this goes back to exactly what we're talking about, why it's so important that we study history, and not just history as a series of things that were written down by the people who had the tools to write them, but history as, hang on one second. Uh, there we go. But history as a function of sociology, history as a function of humanity.
Absolutely. And it also shows that when creating technology, intent and priorities are important. Looking back at computer history, the things that have changed the world for the better weren't the profit seeking tools. I mean, just look at the World Wide Web. or the internet. Both of those things were created publicly by research institutions, whether it was ARPANET or CERN. ARPANET creating the internet, the foundation for the internet. CERN is where, the World Wide Web and like basically the foundations for how we use the internet. The application that runs on top of the internet, that's where that was created. All these were free for the public. And I feel like a lot of times, people look at things like Facebook and go, whoa, what a genius. And I'm like, not really. The guy was using what was already created by a giant group of scientists that they put out for free. And the intent for those, the intent for the World Wide Web was to very much in the vein of Douglas Engelbart's online system. It was to create a tool for collaborative work, for connecting people and creating things. And that's cool software. And then you have to think, what is the intent of the software that we are interfacing with every day? If it's social media is how we're interfacing with it for the majority of our times, well, the intent for that is to sell ads.
Yeah, or at least that's what it has. That's what it's become at the very least. I don't know if like the earliest social media platforms, like, I don't know, IRC or like these different channels that you would kind of be able to find people on and have conversations on they really, I wonder if there was a noble kind of, we're trying to connect people from all over the globe who have common interests and allow them to interface in a way that they never could have before. But as soon as a large media company...
Sorry.
Oh, no, that's okay. Just like exactly what you're saying. Like as soon as a large media company learned how to monetize it, then it became every decision they made was in service to the profit, not in service to the user. And like, yes, you could point to examples where like they did this for the user. It's like they did it for the user to keep the user around, so they would keep using it, so they would keep getting served ads.
Well, it just shows the need for a public social media. A nonprofit social media, which a lot of really smart people are talking about. And it's just, do we have the will? It's kind of like with all of our big problems. It's like we have the tools, but do we have the political will to actually execute it?
Right. I mean, we have Wikipedia, which is sort of like a public, not-for-profit, like massive knowledge platform that people kind of figured out how to work together and make awesome and, have mods and have people updating it all the time. Like, why don't we have a social media platform like that? I mean, it requires a lot of people to do a lot of thankless work, I guess.
Yeah, but you know what? Like Wikipedia is a great model for that. It's like, and I don't think people see the work as thankless. I just think it's like, once you do something one way, it's hard to make a shift and a change. And again, it's like all the big topics that I talk about, whether it's equity or climate change, it all goes back to this thing of we have the tools, we have really smart people who have already figured a lot of this out. It comes down to political will. And I think I say this as someone whose career has been super helped by being on Instagram. I'm not trying to hate the player. Perhaps I'm just trying to hate the game, I just think maybe there's a better way. It's like, why settle on good or okay when we could strive for excellence?
And when we could do it in a way that's like egalitarian, because I mean, I kind of look at it similar to you. My career really benefited from Twitter, and we're seeing a perfect example. I mean, we've long seen the kind of Facebook, Instagram, Meta, like slow, insidious, insipid, like deterioration. People are like, I'm finally getting off Facebook. No, I can't get off Facebook. I'm finally getting off Facebook. Mm-hmm. But I think we saw this overnight thing with Musk, and all of us are sitting there going, what's going to happen with Twitter? Like, am I going to be able to keep using this platform the way I've been using it? Because I have no idea what's around the corner now that this like sort of unhinged billionaire is like at the helm. You know what I mean? Like
the king is making decrees.
Yes. And so, maybe it takes something like that happening, like the proof, instead of it being slow and steady in the background, like with Zuckerberg, this like over the top, in your face, check it out, people. I hold the strings for people to go, okay, never mind. That's like a bridge too far. I don't know. I guess we'll have to wait and see. Or maybe we just keep our heads down and we keep using it with all the new requirements that we have to, or all the things we have to give up in order to keep using it. I
And
mean,
it's hard
history
when
tells us we do that too.
yeah, and it becomes harder when people's livelihoods become tied to this communication network. Do you know what I mean? And me and all my artist friends keep saying, hey, the free lunch is over, in regards to even like Instagram, which is a more visual platform than Twitter, where we're like, oh, it's hard to punch through all of the noise and how the new meta Instagram wants you to create content. It's a much less freer creative space. And it's like, yeah, a lot of people feel frustrated. I think something new will pop up because it always does. I mean, I remember when MySpace was all the rage and
Mm-hmm.
Tumblr was all the rage. And then,
Oh,
they
and
tried to
Vine. I shared it on Vine
Vine.
the other day on Instagram, of course. And everybody was like, oh, Vine. I miss Vine so much.
So it's like these social media sites, they do have a lifespan. And and even, maybe Twitter, we're watching a dying star happen in real time, a gas giant perhaps, but who knows? Who knows? Again, it's like, it's hard to say, when small businesses' livelihoods are connected to a platform, it becomes harder and harder to untwine yourself from them. Again, which is why there's such a need for a public platform that's not beholden to the kings, these billionaires who run monopolies.
And you see that over and over again, right? We see that when we're talking about healthcare and a public option. We see it when we're talking about media, not social media, but traditional media and public television. And there are studies, like multiple studies. I actually talked about one on SGU maybe about a year ago that show that the health of a country's public media is correlated really significantly highly with the health of their democracy.
Oh
We
yeah.
need these public platforms for to have a voice, to maintain our health, to be able to engage, like you were talking about, in creating, to engage in commerce, all of these things. If there are too many, I guess, barriers to the middle class, or even sadly an underclass, a made underclass, from being able to access those things, we are living in a, you know, it's not a democracy. It's a bastardization of that idea.
Well, that's because information is the lifeblood of democracy.
Yeah.
We need to be able to make sure that people can have access to facts, that those facts are not hidden behind a paywall. All of this, yeah. I mean, I
Yeah,
think,
we are a
and
plutocracy right now. I mean, it's it's kind of silly. It's we can look at, like, I don't know, like England from whatever dates and be like, that's an obvious plutocracy. But like that is our government is run by people who have money. You can't get elected to office unless you have money. And if you want to get the ear of somebody in office who's making policy decisions, then you lobby them, and that's money. That's money. Like the way to get around it is one person, one vote,
yeah.
and stopping forgetting that actually works.
I mean, I think, uh, as I tour the country a lot for my books, and I talk to teachers a lot. And just building on what you said, there's a huge frustration about the information landscape that's out there, and being able to navigate what's true, what's untrue. Because when that starts to break down, society begins to break down, and sometimes they even see it in their classrooms. And again, another big reason why I wanted to create this book, because if we're talking about the way we get information, then we have to also talk about access to tools that allow us to think and build. And so it kind of just goes full circle, where it's like, to know that there's a problem, you got to understand the past to know what to ask for. and also know that you have a right to ask for things when it comes to technology, even if you're not in a tech field. You don't have to know everything about how your computer works to ask for it to work better, you know?
Absolutely. I'm curious, like it so bums me out that my platform right now, this platform that we're on is like audio only because we're talking about such a beautiful visual medium and the just absolute skill and talent and hard work that you put into such a beautiful book. And I just really hope that comes across because people can only hear us. They can't see anything that we're talking about.
Well, I broke my arm when I was making this, if it makes people like understand. Like this was a hard project to get done. I literally gave myself the worst bout of carpal tunnel I've ever got in my life, and they had to shoot steroids into my elbow.
Oh no!
So,
terrible.
For that alone, check the book out. Look at the drawings, because I mean, man, I drew a lot. I drew a lot at a very small scale. Like, I feel like you could go over this book with a magnifying glass and like,
yeah, it does. Like, even compared to, I mean, and you do that a lot in all of your art is you have these like larger gestalts and then these like smaller details, and there's always something to find. But this one definitely is incredibly detailed. And there are a lot of pages that are like tiled out with just tons of information and lots of beauty. And you can spend hours looking at this book, or you can read it relatively quickly. Like, there's just different levels to it, which is amazing. So I'm curious from you, Rachel, like who, when you were sitting down to to draw this and write this, to create this, who was the audience that you were thinking of? Was it people like us who sort of grew up with access but weren't digital natives? Was it their parent? Was it like the boomers and people who were like, oh, I don't know anything? Or was it like the kids who are sort of like already naturally disposed to this? Or was it everyone?
Is it crazy to say everyone? Like, this is an all ages book, and I wrote it
I love that.
I wrote it at an 8th grade level because that's what the news is written at.
Are you serious? The news is written at an 8th grade level?
It is. Well,
Wow.
And that's when you talk about accessibility, that's a part of it actually, is being like making sure that people can understand what you're talking about at different educational levels. And, a lot of times someone's education has nothing to do with how actually smart they are and the type of information that they can retain. And I mean, man, when you go into an elementary school, you really feel that for real. Those kids are really quick. So this book, I would say, ages down to 10 years old and ages up to professional. And I do that by, like you said, through illustration. I layer information in a way where no matter what your level is, you could either grow with the book and learn more, or you could like see all the like cool deep cuts and sort of like facts that you about your favorite topic if you're really into computer history already. So by illustrating tons of fun facts, tons of spot illustrations, places for you to rest, places for you to get introduced to the information before reading a single word, because that's what illustration can do. Just like I was talking about with the graphic user interface, it introduces you to what you're going to be working with without saying anything. Through that introduction visually, I'm able to reach such a vast audience. And I'm really excited to say that this book is already being used in classrooms at the high school level, at the middle school level, and is being enjoyed by a bunch of like awesome tech nerds. I just went to NASA to give a book talk on this book to a big group of engineers, and they were all jumping up and down, having a great time pointing at all the fun facts. So it's always great to see it, like such a breadth of an audience get excited about a book.
Oh, I love that so, so, so much. And, it's so funny. I was thinking, we've had this long relationship. You and I actually met over podcasting. I think we met when I had you on my show back when you wrote Women in Science.
Oh my God. Yeah. And I was living in Kansas City then.
Yes. So like that, and then you moved to the best coast, and we started to hang out more and more. I looked it up. It looks like, let me see, when was that? That went to air October 16th. So almost to the year in 2017. So that's 5 years ago that I had you on the podcast. For whatever reason, I thought I had you on since then, but I haven't. This is the next episode. And so much has happened since then. So many, obviously, big world events. We've become really dear friends. I'm curious from you. I don't know if you remember, but I used to I always have closed my show with my two big kind of existential, big picture questions. And I don't remember what you said back then, and you don't have to remember either. But I want to know what your answers to those questions would be now, considering that, we're half a decade away from that. So the questions that, just to refresh your memory, are: when you think about the future in whatever context matters to you, personal, professional, social, I don't know, cosmic, global, communal, doesn't matter. When you think about the future, number one, what is the thing that keeps you up the most at night? The thing you're most worried about, concerned, maybe cynical, maybe pessimistic, whatever. And on the flip side of that, where are you finding your hope, your optimism? What are you authentically, genuinely looking forward to?
Oh man.
I know.
I'm going to end up saying that probably the same thing I said last time. So buckle
Could
up,
be.
listeners.
Yeah, because it hasn't changed, right? It hasn't gotten any better. Tell me more.
I don't know. I think this is like the big one that most people talk about, and it's climate change is what keeps me up at night. Climate change. It's the giant boulder rolling towards us that we can all see. You know what I mean? Yeah, and the evidence is everywhere, and in a small way, I try to talk about it in every single book that I do, whether it's about climate change or not, by introducing just the concept to people that, hey, we get ecological benefits from nature. Wouldn't it be cool to keep those benefits, guys? Whether I'm talking to an elementary schooler or talking to an adult, I try to really be like, the natural world is important. Let's let it keep doing the good work it does for us, because in my opinion, just showing a cute koala is not enough. I think we're selfish people, and I don't say that in a bad way. I'm selfish too. I want to know what this tree is doing for me, and it's doing a lot. I mean, especially you live in Florida. I mean, you see it, the mangroves, they keep the soil in place. They keep it from the entire state from washing away every time there's a hurricane.
Yep. I just visited the mangroves 3 days ago, and it was stunning. Absolutely stunning.
Oh my God. The Everglades are so cool.
So cool. I know. It's such a good time.
I last time I was in Florida, which was 2016. No, it wasn't. It was 2015. Oh my God. Last time I was in Florida, I did the Everglades and NASA in all one go. And I was like, science.
Yes. I know. It's it does have that to offer. We forget because of other things, but it absolutely has that to offer.
But that's actually my hope. That's the little ray of joy, is getting to visit protected areas, seeing the good work that people are doing, visiting places like NASA, which are these, old government institutions that are still doing science for science's sake, trying to work on these big problems, and also hearing things about these very, very much smarter people than me talk about ideas about a circular economy, how we can better reuse what we have, almost like we're in a little sailboat. And this is a lot of work that's being done by the MacArthur, not the one that funds artists. It's Ellen MacArthur's foundation, the woman who sailed around the world. She created a foundation all about doing research towards how to build a circular economy. And again, like I said before, we have the technology. It's all about whether or not we have the political will. So it's good to know that we have solutions. We just have to implement them. That's what gives me hope, and I think eventually we'll get the political will as a whole. Stuff will get bad, and then we'll all start working together,
Yeah. And I mean, we're all people, right? And I think it's important to remember that the way things are now in our neck of the woods, wherever you might be, is not the way that things have to be. It's not the way that things always were. And when we because we have this global capability to connect, sure, we can always find examples of places where societies are more closed, where people are worse off, where we're seeing fewer kind of human rights and decisions being made towards social justice. But we can also always see examples of how we could be very open societies, very deeply democratic societies that care deeply about humanity and social justice. And we're all the same people. We're just in different places and we're shaped by different cultural forces, but got the same brains, got the same bodies, like it's the same DNA. You know what I mean? We're all people. So I know that we're capable. I know we're capable.
It's true. And I'm just an artist who just stays in their studio drawing pictures. Like I literally just draw cartoons with smiley faces on all day. It's like, I'm not trying to come down hard on anyone. I also think that if you do what you love and in some small way you can push us towards, I know this sounds goofy, but push us towards like Star Trek in whatever work you're doing, whatever work you're passionate about, maybe that's also like enough. If you look at the work that you do every day and you're like, you know what, I put a little bit more good in the world than I put bad. That's critically thinking too, you know?
I think you're right. I think if every single person on this planet said to themselves, how can I increase the good and how can I decrease the bad? Where am I doing good? And where am I doing bad? How can I just dial that down a little bit? We all do it collectively. It makes a massive impact. And of course, you're doing it with your incredible art. And everybody, the book is The History of the Computer, People, Inventions, and Technology That Changed Our World. And of course, you can get this literally any local museum, any like local bookstore. You can pop in, you're going to find it. You're going to find all of Rachel's other brilliant and beautiful books, along with, like we talked about before, fun things like puzzles and cards and coloring books and different ways that you can engage with the art even further. Of course, you can buy all this stuff online as well. And your website also has like lots of fun stuff like free coloring page downloads and just a lot of resources and stuff too, right?
Yeah, every time I come out with a book, I like to create free worksheets and coloring pages for teachers or really anyone to download and have a good time with. So yeah, if you visit my website and you click on free downloads, there is a ton of worksheets, coloring pages, and resources out there. If that's your jam, or perhaps you're teaching a class and you want a little fun activity to go with your lesson, check it out for sure.
Love it. Love it. Well, everyone, Rachel Ignotofsky. Rachel, thank you so much for being here. I always love catching up with you. I miss you. We've got to do this more often, maybe off air, so yes. We can get into the not so PG stuff too.
Yeah. Tell you how my road trip really went.
Yeah, exactly. I love it. And everyone listening, thank you for coming back week after week after week. I'm really looking forward to the next time we all get together and talk nerdy.